Acts chapter 1. My first account, the book of Luke, Theophilus, I did about all that Jesus began to both do and teach, up to the day that he was taken up, after he had, through the pure Spirit, given directions to the dispatched envoys, whom he had chosen. It was to these that, after his suffering, he also presented himself alive with many demonstrated evidences, being seen by them during 40 days and telling them about things concerning Almighty's kingdom. Now when he was sharing a meal with them, he charged them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to stay around there for the Father's promise, which you heard about from me. For John immersed in water, yet you will be immersed in the pure Spirit, after just a few more of these days. Yes, indeed, after they had come together, they were asking him, saying, Master, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel at this time? Yet he said to them, It isn't for you to know the times or periods that the Father has placed by his own authority, but you will obtain power when the pure Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria, and as far as the limits of the earth. Now after he had said these things, he was lifted up while they were looking on, and a cloud took him up away from their eyes. Then as they were looking intently into the sky while he was going, notice, 2 men in white attire stood beside them, who also said, People of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This Jesus, who was taken up away from you into the sky, will come like this, in the manner that you have gazed at him going into the sky. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mountain called the Mountain of Olives, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey away, 3/4 of a mile. Now when they entered it, they went up to the upper chamber where they were residing, that is, Peter, John, James, and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew or Nathanael, and Matthew, James the little one, Alphaeus' son, Simon the enthusiast, and Judas or Thaddeus, James' son. These were all with one mind, continually persevering in prayer, together with the women, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers and sisters. Now during these days Peter rose up in the middle of the brothers and sisters. There was a crowd together in the same place of about 120 names, and said, Brothers and sisters, the writing had to be fulfilled, that the pure Spirit said beforehand, through David's mouth, about Judas, who became the guide for those who apprehended Jesus, because he was numbered among us, and chanced upon his share of the dispensing service. Yes, indeed, this person acquired a piece of land with the wages of injustice, and when he fell down on his face, he ruptured in the middle, and all his intestines were poured out. Then it became known to everyone who was making a home in Jerusalem, so that in their own dialect that piece of land was called Al-Keldamach, which means the land of blood. For it has been written in the scroll of the musical compositions, or psalms, His residence must become a waste, and no one must be making a home in it. Musical Composition 69, verse 25. And another must take over his caretaking service. Musical Composition 109, verse 8. So then, one of the men who went together with us during the whole time that the Master Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from his immersion by John up to the day when he was taken up from us. One of these ought to become a witness to his resurrection together with us. So they nominated two, Joseph, called Barsabas, who was also called Justus, and Matthias, when they prayed, saying, Master, you who knows what is in the hearts of everyone, indicate which one of these two you have chosen to take the place of the dispensing service and responsibility of being a dispatched envoy, from which Judas stepped beyond the boundaries to go to his own place. Then they drew lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was counted along with the 11 dispatched envoys. Acts chapter 2. Now on the day of Pentecost, or the 50th day, the harvest feast, see Exodus 23 verse 16, of weeks, see Deuteronomy 16 verse 10, a Sunday, they were all together in the same place. Then suddenly there came out of heaven a reverberating sound, like the rushing of a forceful blast, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then there were seen by them tongues like of fire, that were dividing themselves, and one sat on each one of them. Then they were all filled with the pure Spirit, and began to speak in different foreign languages, just as the Spirit was giving them to make speeches. Now there were Jews making a home in Jerusalem, reverent men from every nation under heaven. Now when this sound occurred, the multitude came together. But they were confused, because each one was hearing them speaking in his own dialect. Now they were all amazed and marveled, saying, Notice, are not all these who speak Galileans? So how is it that we are each hearing them in our own dialect to which we were born? Some of us are Parthians, from North Iran, some Medes, from northwest Iran, some Elamites, from west Iran, and some of us make a home in Mesopotamia, Iraq, some in Judea and Cappadocia, East Turkey, some in Pontus, North Turkey, and the province of Asia, West Turkey, some in Phrygia, or Central Turkey, and Pamphylia, South Turkey, some in Egypt and the parts of Libya around Cyrene. Some are visitors from Rome, both Jews by birth and converts to Judaism. And some are Cretans, from Crete, a large Mediterranean island, and Arabians, from Jordan and North Saudi Arabia. We are hearing them speaking in our own languages about the great wonders of Almighty. Now they all kept being amazed and bewildered, saying one to another, What does this mean? Yet others, jeering, said, They are bloated with sweet wine. Now Peter stood up with the 11, and lifted up his voice to make a speech to them. People of Judea, and all you who make a home in Jerusalem, we must be knowing this, and must let your ears hear my declarations. For these people are not drunk, as you are taking it, for it is only the 3rd hour, 9 a.m. of the day. Rather, this is what has been declared through the prophet Joel. And it shall be during the last days, Almighty says, that I will pour out from my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your young ones will see visions, and your older ones will dream dreams. Definitely, even upon my male slaves and upon my female slaves, I will pour out from my Spirit during those days, and they will prophesy. Then I will grant miracles in heaven above, and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and mists of smoke. The sun will be converted into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the coming of the day of the Master, the day of the last age, the great day of his appearance. Then it will be that whoever appeals to the Master's name, Jesus, will be saved from destruction. Joel 2 verses 28 through 32. People of Israel, you must hear these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man who has shown evidence to you of being from Almighty by the powerful works and miracles and signs that Almighty did through him among you, just as you yourselves are aware. This one, with Almighty's previously designated counsel and foreknowledge, who was delivered over by means of the hands of those who were lawless, you nailed up and did away with. But Almighty raised him up, releasing him from the pains of death, since it wasn't possible for him to be held by it. For David says concerning him, I was seeing the Master all the time before me, for he is at my right hand, so that I might not be shaken. For this reason my heart was glad, and my tongue was celebrating. Yet even more, my flesh will place its tent in hope. For you won't forsake my sentient being in the grave, or let your unadulterated one be acquainted with decay. You have made the paths of life in the last age known to me. You will fill me with gladness with the sight of your face. Musical Composition 16, verses 8 through 11. Brothers and sisters, it is allowable to say to you with boldness concerning our ancestor David, that he both completed his life and was buried, and his tomb is among us even to this day. So then, because he was a prophet, and had already noticed that Almighty had promised him, with an oath, to have one of the fruit of his reproductive organs sit on his throne, he noticed this beforehand, and spoke about the resurrection of the Anointed One, that he was neither forsaken in the grave, nor was his flesh acquainted with decay. Almighty raised up this Jesus, a fact to which we all are witnesses. So then, after he was elevated to the right hand of Almighty, and obtained from the Father the promise of the pure Spirit, he poured out this, which you are observing and hearing. For it wasn't David who ascended into the heavens, yet he says, The Master said to my Master, You must sit at my right, until I place your enemies under your feet like a footstool. Musical Composition 110, verse 1. So then, all the house of Israel must know for certain that Almighty has made this Jesus, whom you fastened to a stake, both the Master and the Anointed One. Now when they heard this, they were stabbed in their hearts, and said to Peter and the rest of the dispatched envoys, Brothers, what should we do? Now Peter affirmed to them, You must change your thoughts and feelings, and each one of you must be immersed using the name of Jesus, the Anointed One, for the forgiveness of your wrongs, and you will obtain the freely given gift consisting of the pure Spirit. For the promise, Joel 2 verse 32 and Acts 2 verse 21, is to you and to your children and to all those far off, the pagans. Ephesians 2 verse 13. Whoever the Master our Almighty calls to himself. In addition, with many other words he gave testimony to them, and kept encouraging them, saying, You must be saved from this crooked era. Yes, indeed, those who welcomed his word were immersed, And there were added on that day about 3,000 sentient beings, or persons. Now they were continually persevering in the Dispatched Envoys' teaching, in the sharing of things in common, in the breaking of the biscuit, or the Master's Supper, and in prayers. Now fear kept coming over every sentient being, or person. In addition, many miracles and signs were occurring by means of the Dispatched Envoys. Now all the believers were in the same place, and had everything in common. So they began disposing of their acquisitions and properties, and were dividing them among everyone, according to whoever was having a need. In addition, day after day, they were continually persevering with one mind in the sacred place, and they were continually breaking a biscuit, or eating supper together, love feasts, in house after house, and receiving a share of nourishment in celebration and singleness of heart, continually praising Almighty and having favor with all the people. Now the Master was adding in the same place day after day those who were being saved from destruction. Acts chapter 3. Now Peter and John were going up to the sacred place at the 9th hour, or 3 p.m., the hour of prayer. Then a certain man, who was inherently lame from his mother's belly, was being carried to the sacred place's door that was called Beautiful, where they used to place him day after day to request merciful donations from those who were going into the sacred place. When he noticed Peter and John about to go into the sacred place, he began asking to receive a merciful donation. Now Peter, together with John, looked at him intently and said, "Look at us." Now he began focusing his attention on them, expecting to receive something from them. Yet Peter said, "I don't possess any silver or gold coins. Yet what I do have, this I'm going to give to you. In the name of Jesus, the Anointed One, the Nazarene, walk." Then, grabbing his right hand, he raised him up, and instantly his feet and ankles were given stability. So leaping up, he stood on his feet and began walking, and he entered into the sacred place with them, walking, leaping, and praising Almighty. Then all the people noticed him walking and praising Almighty. Now they began recognizing him, that he was the person who used to sit for merciful donations at the beautiful gate of the sacred place. So they were filled with shock and amazement at what had happened to him. Now while he was continually holding himself to Peter and John, all the people were utterly shocked, and ran together to them at the porch called Solomon's. Now when Peter noticed this, he responded to the people, "People of Israel, why do you marvel at this? Or why do you look so intently at us, as though by our own power or great devotion we had made him walk? The Almighty of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Almighty of our forefathers, has esteemed his servant boy Jesus, after you delivered him over, and disowned him before the face of Pilate, when he had decided to release him. Yet you disowned the pure and just one, and requested a man who was a murderer to be given to you as a favor. Yet you killed the originator of life, but Almighty woke him up from among the dead, a fact to which we are witnesses. Now on the basis of our faith in his name, Jesus, it is his name that gave stability to this person whom you are gazing at and acquainted with. And the faith that comes through him has given him this wholeness in all his parts in front of all of you. Yet now, brothers and sisters, I am aware that you committed it in ignorance, just like your chiefs did also. Yet the things that Almighty announced beforehand through all the prophets' mouths, that his anointed one was to suffer, he has fulfilled like this. So then, you must change your thoughts and feelings, and must turn back to him to have your wrongs erased, so that the time periods of refreshing might come from the face of the Master, and he might dispatch Jesus, the anointed one, who had been appointed for you beforehand. Yet heaven had to receive him until the times of restoration of everything, of which Almighty spoke through the mouths of his pure prophets, from earlier in this age. Moses said, "The Master, your Almighty, will raise up for you a prophet, like me, from among your brothers. You must hear whatever he speaks to you." Yet it will be that every sentient being who doesn't hear that prophet will be utterly exterminated in the destruction from among the people. Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 and 19. Now all the prophets who have spoken, from Samuel and those afterwards, also announce these days. You are the sons of the prophets, and of the contract that Almighty made with your forefathers, saying to Abraham, "And through your seed, or descendant, all the families of the earth will be blessed." Genesis 22, verse 18. After Almighty raised up his servant boy, he dispatched him to you first, to bless you by turning each of you away from your wickedness. Acts chapter 4. Now while they, Peter and John, were speaking to the people, the priests, the officer of the sacred place, and the Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection, came and stood by them, being exasperated because they were continually teaching the people and announcing that in the case of Jesus, there had been a resurrection from among the dead. Then they put their hands on them and placed them in custody for the next day, for it was already dusk. Yet many of those who had heard the word believed, and the number of the people came to be about 5,000. Now it occurred on the next day that their chiefs, older ones, and Bible scholars gathered in Jerusalem, including Annas, the chief priest, Caiaphas, John, Alexander, and whoever were descendants of the chief priest. Then when they stood the men among them, they began quizzing them. "By what power or in what name have you done this?" So Peter, who was filled with the pure Spirit, then said to them, "Chiefs and older ones of the people, if we are being examined today about a good work done to a weak human, about in what name he has been saved from his weakness, then all of you and all the people of Israel must know that it is by the authority of the name of Jesus, the Anointed One, the Nazarene, whom you fastened to a stake, but whom Almighty woke up from among the dead. It is by the authority of this name that this person stands here before you healthy. This is the stone that was treated with contempt by you builders. It became the head cornerstone, a pyramid's top stone." Musical composition 118, verse 22. Now in no other one is there salvation from destruction, for there isn't any other name under heaven that has been given among humans by which it can be petitioned to be saved from destruction. Now as they gazed at the boldness of Peter and John, and grasped that they were uneducated and unskilled humans, they were marveling. In addition, they began recognizing them, that they had been with Jesus. In addition, as they observed the human who had been cured standing with them, they were having nothing to contradict. Now after they had ordered them to go away outside of the Jewish council, they began huddling together with one another, saying, "What should we do to these humans? For the fact that a known sign has occurred through them is apparent to everyone making a home in Jerusalem, and we can't deny it. But so that it might not be disseminated any more among the people, let's threaten them to by no means speak to any human using this name, Jesus." So after they had called them, they gave them a sweeping charge to never utter or teach anything using the name of Jesus. Yet in response, Peter and John said to them, "Whether it is just and right in the sight of Almighty to hear you, rather than Almighty, you must judge. For we can't stop continually speaking about what we have noticed and heard." Yet after they had menaced them, they released them, finding no way to punish them, because of the people, since they were all esteeming Almighty for what had occurred. For the human on whom this sign of healing had occurred was more than 40 years old. Now after they were released, they went to their own people, and reported what things the chief priests and the older ones had said to them. Now when they heard this, they lifted up their voices to Almighty with one mind, and said, "O Owner, it was you who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and everything that is in them, who through the pure Spirit, by the mouth of our father David, your servant boy, said, 'Why did the pagans get upset, and the people meditate on empty things? The kings of the land stood beside them, and the chiefs were gathered in the same place against the Master, and against his anointed one.'" Musical Composition 2, verses 1 through 2. "For it is true that in this city there were gathered against your pure servant boy Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, together with the pagans and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your counsel designated beforehand to occur. Yet now, Master, take notice of their threats, and grant it to your slaves to be continually speaking your word with all boldness, while you stretch out your hand for healing and signs and miracles to occur through the name of your pure servant boy Jesus." Then, after their petition, the place where they were gathered was shaken, and they were all filled with the pure Spirit, and began speaking Almighty's word with boldness. Now the multitude of those who had become believers were of one heart and sentient being, and not even one was saying that any of his possessions was his own, but everything was common property to them. Now the dispatched envoys were giving testimony about the resurrection of the Master Jesus, the Anointed One, with great power. In addition, great favor was on all of them. For there wasn't anyone among them who was destitute, for whoever had pieces of land or houses belonging to them were selling them and bringing the amounts from the things that they had disposed of, and were placing them at the dispatched envoys' feet. Now this was distributed to each, according to whoever was having a need. Now Joseph, a Levite, a native Cyprian, from Cyprus, the large Mediterranean island, who was called Barnabas by the dispatched envoys, which after translation from Hebrew means son of encouragement, sold a piece belonging to him and brought the money and placed it at the dispatched envoys' feet. Acts chapter 5. Yet a certain man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, sold and acquired property, and dishonestly kept back for himself some of the price. His wife was also conscious of this, and brought a certain part and placed it at the dispatched envoy's feet. Now Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan, the adversary, filled your heart to lie to the pure spirit, and to dishonestly keep back for yourself some of the price of the piece of land? While it was staying, or unsold, didn't it stay as yours? Then when it was disposed of, didn't it, or the money, belong to you by right? Why is it that you place this matter in your heart? You haven't lied to humans, but to Almighty. Now as Ananias heard these words, he fell down and stopped sensing anything. That is, he died. And great fear came over all those who heard about it. Now the younger persons rose up and wound him up in a sheet, then carried him out and buried him. Now it occurred, after an interval of about 3 hours, that his wife, who wasn't aware of what had occurred, entered. Now Peter responded to her, Tell me if you paid such and such for the piece of land. Now she said, Yes, that was the amount. Now Peter said to her, Why is it that you have agreed to test the master's spirit? Notice, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Now she instantly fell at his feet and stopped sensing anything. That is, she died. Now when the young persons entered and found her dead, they carried her out and buried her with her husband. Now great fear came over the whole group of called ones, and upon all those who heard about these things. Now many signs and miracles were occurring among the people, through the hands of the dispatched envoys, and they were all with one mind, or meeting in Solomon's porch. Yet none of the rest were daring to join them, but the people were magnifying them. Yet more believers kept being added to the Master, multitudes of both men and women, so that they were even bringing out the weak into the town squares, and placing them on cots and stretchers, so that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might overshadow some of them. Now also, a multitude from the cities around Jerusalem was coming together, bringing the weak and those crowded by unclean spirits, and they were all being cured. Now the chief priests and all those with him, who belonged to the sect or denomination of the Sadducees, and don't believe in the resurrection to life in the last age, were filled with jealousy and rose up, and put their hands on the dispatched envoys, and placed them in public custody. Yet during the night a messenger from the Master opened the doors of the jail. In addition, when he led them out, he said, You must go and stand in the sacred place, and speak to the people all the declarations about this life in the last age. Now upon hearing this, they entered into the sacred place in the early morning, 6 a.m., and began teaching. Now when the chief priest and those with him came along, they called the Jewish council together, even the entire senate of the sons of Israel. Then they dispatched some to the prison to have them led forward. Yet after the assistants or deputies went along, they didn't find them in the jail. Now when they returned, they reported, saying, We found the prison still securely locked, and the guards still standing at the doors. Yet when they opened them, we found no one inside. Now when the officer of the sacred place and the chief priest heard these words, they were bewildered about them, as to what would come of this. Now someone came along and reported to them, "Notice, the men whom you placed in the jail are standing in the sacred place and teaching the people." So the officer with the assistants or deputies then went and led them back, but not with force, for they were afraid that the people might stone them. Now when they had led them back, they stood them before the Jewish council. Then the chief priests asked them, saying, "We charged you with a charge not to teach using this name, Jesus. But notice, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and are intending to bring the blood of this human upon us." Yet in response, Peter and the dispatched envoys said, "A person has to be continually yielding to Almighty, rather than to humans. Now the Almighty of our forefathers woke up Jesus after you killed him with your own hands by hanging him on a stake. Almighty elevated this one to his right hand as the originator and Savior, to give Israel a change in thoughts and feelings, and forgiveness for wrongdoings. We are witnesses to these declared things, and so is the pure Spirit that Almighty has given to those who are yielding to Him." Now when they heard this, they became infuriated, sawed in pieces, and were intending to do away with them. Yet a certain Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, and honored by all the people, rose up in the Jewish council, and gave orders to put the humans outside for a bit. In addition, he said to them, "People of Israel, you must be paying attention to yourselves in what you are about to commit with these humans. For some days ago, Theudas rose up, saying that he was somebody, and a number of men, about 400, rallied to him. But he was done away with, and all those who were persuaded by him were disbanded, and nothing came of them. After this one, Judas the Galilean rose up during the days of the registration, and drew away people after him. But he too was destroyed, and all those who were persuaded by him were scattered. So I now say to you, you must withdraw from these humans, and let them alone. For if this counsel or this work is from humans, it will be demolished. Yet if it is from Almighty, you won't be able to demolish them. And sometime you shall find out that you have been fighters against Almighty." Now they were persuaded by him. So after they had called the dispatched envoys back to them, they lashed them, and charged them not to speak using the name of Jesus, and they released them. Yes, indeed, they went from the face of the Jewish council, rejoicing that they were considered worthy to be dishonored on behalf of the name Jesus. In addition, every day in the sacred place, and in house after house, they never stopped teaching and spreading the good message about the Anointed One Jesus. Acts chapter 6. Now during these days, while the number of students was continually multiplying, a grumbling occurred among the non-Hebrews against the Hebrews, that their widows were being overlooked in the daily dispensing to their needs. Now the 12 called the multitude of the students to them and said, "It isn't pleasing for us to leave teaching Almighty's word to be serving at tables. Now, brothers and sisters, you must pick out 7 men from among you, who can receive testimony as to being full of the Spirit and wisdom, and we will place them over this need. Yet we will persevere in prayer and the dispensing of the word." Now the word spoken before them pleased all the multitude, So they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the pure spirit, and Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas, a former convert to Judaism, from Antioch, a city in northwest Syria. They had these stand before the dispatched envoys, who then prayed and placed their hands on them. Now Almighty's word kept growing, or spreading, and the number of the students kept multiplying tremendously in Jerusalem. In addition, a great crowd of the priests were obeying the faith. Now Stephen, full of favor and power, was doing great miracles and signs among the people. Now some of those from what was called the Assembly of the Libertines, from Libertum in the Roman province of Africa, and the Cyrenians, from Cyrene in Libya, North Africa, and the Alexandrians from Alexandria, Egypt, and of those from Cilicia, southeast Turkey, and the province of Asia, West Turkey, rose up and were having a discussion with Stephen. But they weren't strong enough to stand up against the wisdom and the spirit with which he spoke. Then they put some men up to saying, "We have heard him speak slanderous declarations against Moses and Almighty." They stirred up the people, the older ones, and the Bible scholars. Then they came upon him, seized him, and led him into the Jewish council. In addition, they put false witnesses on the stand, who said, "This human doesn't stop speaking declarations against this pure place and the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus, the Nazarene, will demolish this place and change the customs that Moses delivered over to us." Now when all those who were sitting in the Jewish council looked intently at him, they noticed that his face was like the face of a messenger. Acts chapter 7. Now the chief priest said, "Are these things so?" Now he, Stephen, affirmed, "Brothers and sisters and parents, you must hear me. The Almighty of esteem was seen by our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, or East Iraq, before he had made a home in the city of Haran, in southeast Turkey, and said to him, 'You must come out from your land and your relatives, and must come on into the land that I shall show you.'" Genesis 12, verse 1. So he then went out of the land of the Chaldeans, from Iraq, and made a home in the city of Haran, in southeast Turkey. Then, after his father died, Almighty exiled him from there into this land where you are now making a home. But he didn't give him any inheritance in it, not even enough for him to platform 1 foot. And yet he did promise to eventually give it to him as a holding, and to his seed, or descendants, after him, even though he didn't have a child. Genesis 12, verse 7, and 17, verse 8. Yet Almighty spoke like this, that his seed, or descendants, would be foreigners in an alien land, where they would be enslaved and treated badly for 400 years. Genesis 15, verse 13. Then the nation for which they will slave I will judge. Genesis 15, verse 14. Almighty said, "And after these things they will come out and offer divine service to me in this place." Exodus 3, verse 12. Then he gave him the contract of circumcision. Genesis 17, verses 9 through 14. And so he caused the birth of Isaac, and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac caused the birth of Jacob, and Jacob caused the birth of our 12 ancestors. Now our ancestors were jealous of Joseph, and gave him in return for payment to Egypt. But Almighty was with him, and yanked him up out of all his oppressions, and granted him favor and wisdom in front of the Pharaoh, or the king of Egypt. And he placed him as governor over Egypt, and all his household. Now a famine came over all Egypt and Canaan, and the oppression was great, and our forefathers weren't finding enough food to satisfy them. Now when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he dispatched our forefathers out the first time. Now the second time, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's original country became apparent to the Pharaoh. Now Joseph dispatched word, and called for his father Jacob, and all his relatives, 75 sentient beings, or persons in all. Then Jacob descended into Egypt, and he and our forefathers completed their lives there. Then their bodies were transferred to Shechem, and placed in the tomb that Abraham had purchased for a price in silver coins from Hamor's sons in Shechem. Now as the time of the promise was drawing near that Almighty had acknowledged to Abraham, the people grew in number and multiplied in Egypt, until a different king rose up over Egypt, who hadn't been acquainted with Joseph. It was this person who took advantage of our countrymen and treated our forefathers badly by causing them to expose their babies so that they wouldn't live. It was this time period that Moses was born, and he was handsome even to Almighty, and he was raised for 3 months in his father's home. Yet after he was exposed, the Pharaoh's daughter lifted him up and raised him as her own son. So Moses was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was powerful in his words and works. Now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to take care of his brothers, the sons of Israel. Then when he noticed someone was being injured, he came to his aid and got justice for the person who was being treated miserably by striking the Egyptian. Now he was surmising that his brothers understood that Almighty was giving them salvation from the Egyptians through his hand. Yet they didn't understand. In addition, on the following day, he was seen by them while they were fighting, and he tried interceding for peace between them, saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why are you injuring one another?" Yet the one who was injuring his neighbor pushed him away, saying, "Who placed you as a chief and judge over us? You don't want to do away with me in the same way that you did away with the Egyptian yesterday, do you?" Now at this word, Moses ran away and became a foreigner in the land of Midian, Saudi Arabia, where he caused the birth of 2 sons. Now after 40 years had been finished, a messenger was seen by him in the wasteland near Mount Sinai, in the flame of a bramble bush fire. Now when Moses noticed it, he began marveling at the vision. Yet when he approached to consider it, the Master's voice came, "I am the Almighty of your forefathers, the Almighty of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Exodus 3 verse 6. Now Moses started to tremble, and wasn't daring to consider it or look at it. Now the Master said to him, "Release the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is pure land." Exodus 3 verse 5. I have certainly noticed the bad treatment of my people in Egypt, and have heard their groans. So I have descended to yank them out. Exodus 3 verse 7. Now come here, and I shall dispatch you into Egypt. Exodus 3, verse 10. This very Moses, whom they disowned, saying, Who placed you as a chief and a judge? Was the one whom Almighty dispatched to be both a chief and a ransom payer, with the helping hand of the messenger who was seen by him in the bramble bush. This one led them out, doing miracles and signs in the land of Egypt, in the Red Sea, and in the wasteland for 40 years. It was this Moses who said to the sons of Israel, Almighty will raise up for you a prophet, like me, from among your brothers. Deuteronomy 18, verse 15. This is the one who in the group of called ones in the wasteland came to be between the messenger who was speaking to him on Mount Sinai and our forefathers, and he received the living words to give to you. Now our forefathers weren't willing to be obedient to him, but pushed him away, and in their hearts turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, Make us mighty ones, who will go before us. For this Moses, who led us out of the land of Egypt, we aren't aware of what became of him. Then, during those days, they made a calf, and led up a sacrifice to the idol, and had a good time with the works of their hands. Yet Almighty turned away, and delivered them over to offer divine service to the army of the sky, the stars, astrology, paganism, just as it has been written in the scrolls of the prophets. You didn't offer me slaughtered victims and sacrifices for 40 years in the wasteland, did you, house of Israel? But you took with you the tent of Moloch, a mighty one who was honored by the burning sacrifice of children, and the star of your mighty one Saturn, the representations that you made to worship them. So I will exile you beyond Babylon. Amos 5, verses 25 through 27. Our forefathers had the testimony tent in the wasteland, just as the one who spoke to Moses advocated that it should be made according to the representation that he had seen. Then our forefathers who succeeded him together with Joshua brought it into the holding of the pagans, whom Almighty pushed out from the face of our forefathers until the days of David, who found favor before Almighty and requested that he might find a tent for the mighty one of Jacob. Yet it was Solomon who built him a house. Nevertheless, the Most High isn't making a home in places made by hands, just as the prophet says, Heaven is my throne, and the earth is the footstool for my feet. What kind of house will you build for me? Says the Master. Or what place is there for me when I stop working? Wasn't it my hand that made all these things? Isaiah 66, verses 1 through 2. You stiff-necked people, with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are constantly clashing with the pure spirit. As your forefathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets didn't your forefathers persecute? They killed those who announced beforehand about the coming of the Just One, and now you have betrayed and murdered him. And you got the law through the messenger's advocations, and yet didn't maintain it. Now when they heard these things, they were infuriated, sawed into pieces in their hearts, and began grinding their teeth at him. Now since he possessed the fullness of the pure spirit, he looked intently into heaven, and noticed the esteem of Almighty, and Jesus standing at the right hand of Almighty. Then he said, Notice, I am gazing at the heavens opened up, and the Son of Humanity standing at the right hand of Almighty. Now they yelled out with a loud voice, and pressed against their ears, and rushed upon him with one mind. Then they threw him outside of the city, and began stoning him. And the witnesses took off their outer garments, and put them at the feet of a young man named Saul, or Paul. Then they kept stoning Stephen, while he was appealing, and saying, Master Jesu, accept my spirit. Now he knelt down and yelled out with a loud voice, Master, you must not hold this wrongdoing against them. Now after he had said this, he fell asleep, or died. Acts chapter 8. Yet Saul, or Paul, was approving of his assassination. Now on that day a great persecution occurred against the group of called ones that was in Jerusalem, and all of them, except the dispatched envoys, were dispersed among the districts of Judea and Samaria. Yet some reverent men were Stephen's pallbearers, and they did great grieving over him. Now Saul, or Paul, began devastating the group of called ones. Going into house after house, he dragged out both men and women, and kept delivering them over to jail. Yes, indeed, those who had been dispersed went from place to place, spreading the good message of the word. Now Philip went down into the city of Samaria, and began proclaiming the Anointed One to them. Now the crowds paid attention to the things being said by Philip with one mind, while they heard and observed the signs that he kept doing. For unclean spirits went out of many who had them, crying out with loud voices, and many who had been paralyzed and lame were cured. Now there was much joy occurring in that city. Now a certain man named Simon had previously existed in the city by using science, and had amazed the nation of Samaria. He said that he was somebody great, and they all paid attention to this, from the least important to the greatest of them, saying, This person is the one who is called the great power of Almighty. Now they were paying attention to him, because he had, for a considerable time, amazed them with his science. Yet when they believed the good message being spread by Philip about Almighty's kingdom, and the name of Jesus, the Anointed One, they were being immersed, both men and women. Now even Simon himself believed, and after he was immersed, he was continually waiting on Philip. In addition, as he gazed at the signs and great powerful works that were occurring, he kept being amazed. Now when the dispatched envoys in Jerusalem heard that Samaria had accepted Almighty's word, they dispatched to them Peter and John, who descended and prayed about them, so that they might obtain the pure spirit, for as yet it hadn't fallen upon any of them. Now they had only been immersed in the name of the Master Jesus. So they then began placing their hands on them, and they were obtaining the pure spirit. Now when Simon noticed that the pure spirit was given by means of the dispatched envoys placing their hands on people, he offered them money, saying, Give me this authority too, so that everyone on whom I place my hands might obtain the pure spirit. Yet Peter said to him, May your silver coins be destroyed together with you, because you surmised you could acquire the freely given gift of Almighty with money. You have no part or share in this matter, for your heart isn't straight in front of Almighty. So then, you must change your thoughts and feelings from this bad thing of yours, and must petition the master, so that perhaps he will forgive you for this notion in your heart. For I see that you are in the bile of, and poisoned with, bitterness, and imprisoned by injustice." Now in response, Simon said, "You must petition the master on my behalf, so that nothing of what you have declared might come upon me." Yes, indeed, when they had given testimony to, and spoken the master's word, they began returning to Jerusalem. In addition, they were spreading the good message to many villages of the Samaritans. Now a messenger from the master spoke to Philip, saying, "Rise up and go at noontime on the road that descends from Jerusalem, southwest to Gaza, a city in southwest Judea. This is a wasteland." So he rose up and went. Now notice, there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a powerful person with Candace, the Ethiopian queen, and over her entire treasury. He had come to Jerusalem to worship. Now as he was returning and sitting in his chariot, he was reading the prophet Isaiah. Now the Spirit said to Philip, "Approach and join this chariot." Now when Philip had run up, he heard him reading the prophet Isaiah, and said, "Do you definitely know or understand what you are reading?" Yet he said, "How could I, unless someone guides me?" In addition, he encouraged Philip to step up and sit with him. Now the context of the writing that he was reading was this: "Like a sheep he was led to slaughter, and just like a lamb doesn't make a sound in front of its shearer, in the same way he isn't opening his mouth. In his humiliation, just judgment was taken away from him. Who will relate about his generation? For his life is going to be taken away from the earth." Isaiah 53 verses 7 through 8. Now in response, the eunuch said to Philip, "I petition you, about whom is the prophet saying this? About himself or about someone else?" Now Philip opened his mouth and began from this writing, delivered the good message about Jesus to him. Now as they were going along the road, they came to some water. And the eunuch affirmed, "Notice, water! What prevents me from being immersed?" No verse 37. So he ordered the chariot to stop. Then they both descended into the water, Philip as well as the eunuch, and he immersed him. Now when they stepped up out of the water, the Spirit of the Master seized Philip away, and the eunuch didn't notice him any longer, but he went his way rejoicing. Yet Philip was found in Azotus, a town in West Judea, and as he went from place to place, he kept spreading the good message to all the cities, until he came to Caesarea, a city in northwest Samaria. Acts chapter 9. Now Saul, or Paul, who was still breathing out threats and murder against the master's students, approached the chief priest and requested letters from him to the Jewish assemblies at Damascus, a city in North Arabia, so that if he found any who belonged to the Way, both men and women, he might lead them bound to Jerusalem. Now it occurred that as he went and drew near Damascus, suddenly a light from the sky flashed around him. Now after he fell on the earth, he heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Yet he said, "Who are you, Master?" Now he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Nevertheless, rise up and enter the city, and it will be spoken to you what you ought to be doing. Now the men who were journeying with him stood dumbfounded, hearing the sound, yet seeing no one. Now Saul, or Paul, was raised up from the earth, yet when he opened his eyes, Now Saul, or Paul, was raised up from the earth, yet when he opened his eyes, he wasn't observing anything. Now leading him by the hand, they led him into Damascus. So for 3 days he wasn't observing anything, and he neither ate nor drank. Now there was a certain student in Damascus named Ananias, and the master said to him in a vision, Ananias! Now he said, Notice, here I am, master. Now the master said to him, Rise up and go to a street called Straight, and seek at the house of Judas for a man from Tarsus named Saul. For notice, he is praying, and has noticed in a vision a man named Ananias enter and place his hands on him, so that he might receive his sight. Yet Ananias responded, Master, I have heard from many about this man, how many bad things he has done to your pure ones in Jerusalem, and that he has authority here from the chief priests to bind all those who are appealing to your name, Jesus. Yet the master said to him, You must go, because he is my chosen instrument to carry my name, Jesus, before the pagans and their kings, as well as before the sons of Israel. For I will suggest to him how much he has to suffer on behalf of my name, Jesus. Now Ananias went away and entered the house, and after he had placed his hands on him, he said, Saul, my brother, the Master Jesus, who was seen by you on the road by which you were coming, has dispatched me, so that you might receive your sight, and be filled with the pure Spirit. Now immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales, and he received his sight. In addition, he rose up and was immersed. Then he obtained some nourishment, and was strengthened. Now for several days he was with the students in Damascus, and began immediately proclaiming Jesus in the Jewish assemblies, that he is the Son of Almighty. Now everyone who heard him kept being amazed, and were saying, Isn't this the person who in Jerusalem savagely destroyed those who were appealing to this name, Jesus, and who had come here for the purpose of leading them bound to the chief priests? Yet Saul, or Paul, kept becoming more invigorated, and throwing the Jews making a home in Damascus into confusion, by figuring out with them that this one is the Anointed One. Now when a considerable number of days were fulfilled, the Jews consulted together about doing away with him. Yet their plot became known to Saul, or Paul. So they were also keeping close notice of the gates, both day and night, so that they might do away with him. Yet his students took him by night, and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a round basket. Now after he had come to Jerusalem, he began trying to join the students, but every one was afraid of him, because they didn't believe that he was really a student. Yet Barnabas took hold of him, and led him to the Dispatched Envoys, and related to them how he had become acquainted with the Master on the road, and that he spoke to him, and how in Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. Now he was with them in Jerusalem, going in and out, speaking out boldly in the name of the Master, Jesus. He kept both speaking to and having discussions with the non-Hebrew Jews. Yet they kept attempting to do away with him. Now when the brothers and sisters recognized this, they led him down into Caesarea, a city in northwest Samaria, and sent him away to Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, southeast Turkey. Yes, indeed, the group of called ones throughout all of Judea, Galilee, and Samaria was having peace, being built up, and going on with deep respect for the Master, and the encouragement of the pure Spirit kept multiplying. Now it occurred, as Peter was going everywhere, to place after place, that he also came down to the pure ones, who were making a home at Lydda, a town in northwest Judea. Now there he found a certain human named Aeneas, who had been lying down on a stretcher for 8 years, because he was paralyzed. So Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus, the Anointed One, is healing you. Rise up and spread out your bedding by yourself as a place for us to sit. So immediately he rose up. Now all those who made their homes in Lydda and Sharon, the coastal region of northwest Judea, noticed him, and they turned back to the Master. Now in Joppa, a city on the coast of northwest Judea, there was a certain student named Tabitha, which when interpreted from the native language of Mid-Easterners, is called Dorcas, or Gazelle. This woman was full of good works, and the giving of merciful donations that she kept doing. Now it occurred during those days that she became weak and died. Now after they had bathed her, they placed her in an upper chamber. Now as Lydda is near Joppa, when the students heard that Peter was there, they dispatched 2 men to him, encouraging him, You must not be slow in coming to us. Now Peter rose up and went together with them. After he had come along, they led him up into the upper chamber. And all of the widows stood beside him weeping, and showing all the gowns and outer garments that Dorcas kept making while she was with them. Yet Peter put them all out outside, and knelt down and prayed. Then, turning around to the body, he said, Tabitha, rise up. Now she opened her eyes, and when she noticed Peter, she sat up. Now he gave her his hand, and raised her up. Now he shouted to the pure ones and the widows, and presented her alive. Now it became known throughout all of Joppa, and many believed in the Master. Now it occurred that he stayed for a considerable number of days in Joppa, and a certain tanner, Simon,